Have you ever imagined what you would do if you saw someone who loves to be destroyed in front of you? What happens within a person when he witnesses cruelty in his purest form? Today, I will tell you something that few know, but that changed the fate of many. A story buried in the dark corners of colonial Bahia, where a woman named Dandara has transformed pain into revenge so brutally that her name became a whisper of fear among slave overseers for decades. This is not just violence. It is upon how far the human being can go when everything is taken from him. What I will reveal in the next words never appeared in the official history books. Subscribe now, not to lose any of these stories that have been hidden for centuries. What Dandara did to that foreman after what he did to his sister. Well, some say that even the devil would not have the courage to look. Continue here with me and find out how a single night of fury has changed the balance of power throughout a mill and inspired revolts throughout the captaincy. The remains of the Santo Antonio Ingenio still exist, hidden among the dense vegetation around Salvador. Pieces of mud wall resist time as silent witnesses. The smell of molasses seems impregnated in the red earth. In 1763, this place was not just a sugar production center. It was a field of torture legitimized by the Portuguese state and the church. The blood that dripped on this floor tells stories that official documents tried to erase. The full moon illuminated the central yard that night, creating elongated shadows in the big house, as fingers trying to reach the senzala. The gears of the ingenuity ranged with the weight of forced labor, while the foreman Geronimo Albuquerque watched all from his horse's top. Some say it was this exact place that he made his last mistake. Underestimate the determination of a woman whom he had already taken anything but the ability to plan. Justice, when it does not come from above, arises from the depths. What happened in this mill was not just a revenge. It was a sentence performed after years of atrocities without punishment, and each cut piece of the body of the foreman represented an invisible scar in the souls of those who suffered under their whip. If you want to follow more cases like this, which move with all society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any investigation. In the Santo Antonio mill, the hierarchy was clear as the division between heaven and hell. The big house, built in imported Portuguese stone, occupied the highest point of the property, its 22 windows as vigilant eyes on the 400 hectares of land. Below, the senzala compressed 237 bodies in a space designed for degradation, without windows, with only one door locked on the outside every night. The day began at 4 in the morning with the bell that hung from the central trunk. Each slave had its designated function, some in the sugarcane fields under the merciless sun, others in the frill where the deafening noise of wood gears chewing the sugarcane day and night caused deafness in less than 5 years. The air was permanently loaded with the sweet scent of fermenting cane, mixed with sweat and dry blood. Flor Geronimo Albuquerque not only used the traditional whip. His fame came from a collection of torture instruments he himself adapted: a 9-pointed whip with metal fragments at the ends, a chair with strategically positioned nails, and the angel, a wooden structure where slaves were tied upside down and slowly plunged into the boiling water used in the sugar process. Senzala's architecture was designed to break the spirit. Low ceiling that prevented someone from being completely erect for a long time, a dirt floor that turned mud in the rainy season, and minimal openings that turned the environment into an oven during the day and a freezing camera at night. The sound of the whips cutting the air and reaching human flesh was so often that even the birds stopped singing nearby. That March afternoon, when the heavy clouds formed on the horizon and the frogs started their choir out of hour, the elders whispered that something was about to change. Dandara looked at the sky and saw a hawk stopped in the air, as if time had frozen for a moment. The omen was released. Dandara was not any slave in the Santo Antonio mill. At 27, he dominated the art of herbal manipulation like no one else throughout the region. His agile hands knew every plant that grew in the woods around, those that healed wounds opened by the whip, those who lowered fevers, those who could take the pain, and also those who could kill without leaving any trace. Also brought about Angola's child, Dandara learned to speak Portuguese without accent, a skill that made her precious in the negotiations with mercadores that came to buy sugar. The lady of Ingenio, Dona Catarina, trusted her to prepare the medicines for her chronic migraines, and even to watch her youngest daughter. This privileged position allowed Dandara to transit between the worlds, from the big house to the senzala, from the kitchen to the main quarters, from the fields of sugarcane to the city of Salvador. On Wednesday nights, when you went to Mass in the city's chapel, neighboring mills risked severe punishment to hear their stories about African ancestors and learn about the secret properties of plants. They knew she kept small bags of seeds brought from Africa, hidden in a hole under the floor of the kitchen. The Lord of the Engenho, Dom Francisco de Almeida, did not realize the power that grew right under his ceiling. For him, Dandara was just the black of herbs, useful when some valuable slave got sick and needed to be recovered quickly. What he never noticed was how she watched everything, memorized routines, knew every corner of the property, every time of guard exchange, every moment when the main gate was without vigilance. The paradox that defined Dandara was this: the more they trusted her, the more she learned how to destroy them. While applying cataplasms to the Lord's wife, he listened to money loads. While served dinner to the illustrious guests, I mapped who was vulnerable to what. All this saved in silence, like a slowly distilled poison. Leave in the comments. Never give up the truth if you believe justice must reach all the oppressed. The atrocities in Engenho Santo Antonio had a mathematical progression, as if every act of cruelty had to overcome the previous one. First came the ordinary punishments, whipping in the public square for smaller offenses such as breaking a tool or talking when unauthorized. 20 whip, 50, 100. The numbers climbed like a ladder for hell. Then Jerome introduced innovations. In June 1762, he forced an elderly slave to drink boiling water because he slept during work in the furnace. The man survived only 2 days, his throat and stomach destroyed. In September of the same year, she tied a pregnant woman with a tinge on an anthill because she asked to rest during work in the sugarcane field. She lost her baby and sanity. Dandara watched each of these events, her face an impassive mask that hid the growing hatred. When I washed the victim's wounds in the dead of night, I whispered, "I see, I remember. Our ancestors are watching." His own skin carried 5 whip marks on his back when he refused to deliver a mixture of herbs that Jerome wanted to use to torture a sick slave. In December, the foreman arrested a 14-year-old in a wooden box for 3 days without water or food because he found him looking at the daughter of the mill. When they opened the box, the boy had ripped pieces from his own skin. He died hours later in the arms of Dandara, who packed him singing softly in Quimbundo while memorizing every detail of the box: dimensions, lock, location. In the early months of 1763, something changed in Jerome's behavior. Cruelty has gained more personal, more intimate contours. He started selecting specific victims, not for infractions, but on a whim. Anyone who remembered strength or dignity became a target. Dandara realized the pattern. He was systematically eliminating anyone who could resist. Each new atrocity transformed something inside it. The initial fear gave way to anger. The anger at the cold calculation. Her previously expressive eyes became distant, as if she observed everything far away. At night, while the others cried with exhaustion, she trained accurate movements with small makeshift knives, perfecting silent cuts in small animals she captured. The escalation of horrors culminated in Corpus Christi week, when Jerome ordered 3 men to be tied with their backs to each other and left in the sun for 2 days without water. Only one survived. Dandara treated him secret, and as he cleaned his infected wounds, a decision was crystallized in his heart. There was a line that, once crossed, would not allow return. Ayana was more than a sister to Dandara. They arrived together from Africa, sharing the same filthy basement as the slave ship, clinging to each other during the crossing that killed 1/3 of the captives. In the mill, they managed to stay close, Dandara in the big house and Ayana in the kitchen, where her candy talent made her valuable. At 23, Ayana was known for her delicate beauty and constant smile, a rarity in that place of hopelessness. His harmonious face, with large and expressive eyes, aroused both admiration and envy. For Dandara, that smile was the last connection with the lost childhood, the memory of a time before the chains. On June 10, 1763, during the preparations for the Feast of St. Anthony, patron saint of Engenho, Ayana was late with the production of sweets. Jerome, already drunk early on, entered the kitchen demanding the manjars that would be served to the illustrious guests. When she explained that she needed a few more hours, he dragged her through her hair to the yard. What followed was witnessed by all. Jerome tied Ayana to the central trunk and announced that he would teach the black woman not to make you wait. Instead of the ordinary whip, he used a new instrument, a sharp blue ends. The first blow tore the skin from his shoulder to the ribs. The second cut his face from his forehead to his chin, destroying his right eye. Dandara, bringing herbs from the woods, heard the screams and ran. When he arrived, Ayana had already received 12 whip, her unrecognizable face under the blood. Jerome, seeing Dandara, smiled and said, "Now she doesn't smile anymore to anyone. Let's see if anyone still finds her beautiful." Dandara did not shout, did not beg. He knelt beside his unconscious sister while everyone was forced to return to work. At night, he washed each wound with herbs, singing old healing songs. With trembling fingers, she applied cataplasms on Ayana's face, knowing that nothing would return her eye or put out the scar that would divide her face forever. On the third night, when the fever finally gave way and Ayana opened her remaining eye, Dandara took her hand and took an oath, not with words but with a gesture. He cut his own wrist and then Ayana's, uniting the blood. In the rituals of his homeland, it meant more than a promise. It was a sealed destination, a soul divided into two bodies, a shared death. Geronimo Albuquerque was not the only demon in the Santo Antonio Ingenio, only the most visible. There was also Dom Francisco, the owner who signed punishment orders while enjoying his imported wine. Father Anselmo, who blessed the instruments of torture and preached submission as a way to heaven. And the Dr. Ricardo, who experienced treatments in sick slaves as if they were animals. Each played his role in the system. Jerome executed punishments with sadistic pleasure. Dom Francisco profited with the spilled blood. Father Anselmo provided moral justification, and Dr. Ricardo gave scientific varnish to barbarism. Together they formed a seemingly impenetrable fortress of authority. Jerome was 42 years old, a robust body built in 2 decades applying punishments. His face, marked by a scar that cut his left cheek, resulting from a failed revolt 10 years earlier, contrasted with his surprisingly delicate hands with which he created his torture instruments in his spare time. He drank cachaça every night until he lost his conscience and woke up at dawn with renewed thirst of cruelty. His specialty was psychological discipline, forcing slaves to punish each other, parents whipping children, friends torturing friends. Those who refused received twice the punishment. His pride was never having lost a fugitive slave. Those who tried were brought back and transformed into such horrible examples that no one dared to try again. In July 1763, an external event disturbed the balance of the mill. A circular from the viceroy arrived, warning about resistance movements in the region. It was spoken of a quilombo forming in the woods of the Recôncavo Baiano and of coordinated attacks on small properties. The news made Jerome paranoid, convinced that conspiracies grew around him. In the same week, a slave named Bakari was discovered with a small map of the region. Jerome saw this confirmation of his fears. For 3 days, he tortured Bakari in the barn, away from the eyes of others, using techniques he had learned from slave hunters from Maranhão. When it ended, the man was only a broken body and a destroyed mind. Dandara was in the big house when Bakari was dragged out of the barn. She saw him, or what was left of him, being thrown like garbage near the senzala. His eyes were torn, your tongue cut, their broken fingers at impossible angles. Bakari had been his friend, his confidant, perhaps something else in another time and place. That night, as he applied compresses to his sister's injuries, Dandara saw Jerome watching her from the kitchen door, a smile on her face, a silent promise that Ayana was just the beginning. Something broke inside her at that moment. The last thread that linked her to the hope of surviving in that place broke. She understood that she would need to become something beyond human to do what she needed to be done. On August 15, 1763, the day of the Assumption of Our Lady, the St. Anthony Ingenio lived his deepest public humiliation. Jerome, increasingly paranoid with resistance rumors, decided to make a definitive example. The dawn had not yet broken when the bell rang, calling everyone to the central yard. 230, 7 slaves formed a circle surrounded by armed foremen. In the center, Dandara was tied to the trunk of punishment, her torn clothes exposing her back. Beside her, a table with several carefully arranged torture instruments. Jerome appeared mounted on his black horse, slowly surrounding the group. "This black," he announced with a projected voice for everyone to hear. "He has healed slaves without permission. He has used prohibited herbs. He has spoken in demonic tongues at night." Each accusation was a transparent lie, but no one dared to contradict him. The real reason was clear to everyone. Since the attack on Ayana, Dandara had stopped lowering her eyes in her presence. There was a silent challenge in his gaze that disturbed him, an insubordination that needed to be publicly crushed. The punishment began with the traditional whip. 20 blows applied by Jerome himself, which counted aloud as the leather opened the skin from Dandara's back. She didn't shout. It didn't pour a tear. His eyes settled in a distant point, as if his spirit had abandoned his body. After the 20th blow, dissatisfied with the lack of reaction, Jerome took a mixture of salt and vinegar and rubbed the open wounds. Dandara's body twisted involuntarily, but no sound has escaped from her clenched lips. The forced crowd to watch kept a terrifying silence, broken only by the insults of the foreman. Then came the worst part. Jerome called Ayana, still with a deformed and poorly healed face. "Now you will teach your sister to respect your superiors," he said, handing him a smaller whip. When Ayana hesitated, he pressed the blade of a knife against his throat. "Either you hit it 20 times, or I finish the work on your face." With trembling hands and tears dripping from her only eye, Ayana was forced to whip her own sister. His blows were weak, hesitant, but each carried the weight of the deepest humiliation. Dandara absorbed each blow in absolute silence, her now fixed eyes on Jerome, recording every detail of her face in memory. When it was over, Geronimo spit into Dandara and stated, "Now everyone knows that even the witch is above the discipline." He ordered them to leave her tied to the trunk, under the scorching sun, until dark. As the blood dripped down the back and the sun burned his skin, something turned into Dandara. Physical pain was irrelevant compared to the mental metamorphosis that occurred. The last trace of fear evaporated, replaced by absolute clarity. At that moment, Dandara died, and was born something different, something relentless. When the night fell and finally released her, she didn't go to the senzala. With firm steps, despite the injuries, he walked to the kitchen where Ayana worked. No words, he hugged his sister. Then he looked into the eyes of 3 other slaves who witnessed the hug. An almost imperceptible nod was changed. The decision was made. The plan was born that same night, while Dandara applied healing herbs to her own wounds. It wouldn't be an escape. It would be an execution. It was not enough to escape. It was necessary to cut evil from the root, create an example that would echo for generations. For 7 days, Dandara observed and memorized the times when Jerome drank until he lost his conscience, between 10 and 11 at night. The exact moment when the guard switched shifts, midnight. The time he led to someone in the big house to respond to a call, 8 minutes. The less watched paths to the foreman's room at the back of the big house. The tools available in the carpentry workshop. For each element of the plan, Dandara chose a specific accomplice. Bakari, before being tortured to death, had taught him how to open locks with small pieces of metal. Makena, who worked in the laundry, could provide information about when the sheets and clothes of the foreman would be washed. Jelani, at the stable, would guarantee that the horses were restless on the chosen night, distracting the guards. And Ayana would be the perfect bait. Jerome had developed an unhealthy obsession with her since she had destroyed her face. Each accomplice received only fragments of the full plan. No one except Dandara knew all the details. If one were captured and tortured, it could not reveal everything. Communications took place in code developed in work songs or small gestures during meals. The resources were scarce, but Dandara was ingenious. Small knives were improvised from pieces of metal found in the repair workshop. Strings were braided secretly using banana fibers. Herbs to fall asleep were collected during the rare permissions to seek medicinal plants. A slow and painful poison was distilled from seeds kept for years. The date chosen was not accidental. September 13th, 1763, the eve of the Holy Cross Exaltation Feast. That day, Dom Francisco and his family would be in the city for religious celebrations. Only Jerome and some guards would remain in the mill. In addition, it was new moon night. Complete darkness would cover his movements. Dandara appointed the plan on her Christmas language. Kufa qua kisasi, the death of revenge. It would not be just a murder, but a ritual of justice, a sentence executed in the name of hundreds of silenced victims. On nights prior to the execution, Dandara met with each participant individually, passing on his duties. To increase the group's determination, he created a ritual. Each one drank a mixture of his blood with herbs, sealing a pact that went beyond life and death. If we fail, she said, our spirits will continue to fight. The countdown had begun. On the eve of the day marked, the Santo Antonio Ingenio lived two parallel realities. In the big house, preparations for the family departure for celebrations in the city created an environment of festive agitation. Chests were charged, prepared gala, special orders given to the creation. Dom Francisco planned to take advantage of the occasion to negotiate an advantageous marriage to his eldest daughter with the son of an important Portuguese merchant. Meanwhile, in the shadows, a different choreography unfolded. Dandara moved between her normal tasks with a frightening calm. His hands prepared the usual remedies for Dona Catarina, but her eyes recorded every detail, every movement, every opportunity. At noon, the main carriage departed, taking the family of the Lord. The sound of horses' hulls decreasing on the road marked the beginning of the true countdown. Jerome, as expected, celebrated his temporary freedom by increasing his cachaça consumption early on. At 4 in the afternoon, Makina from the laundry dropped accidentally a clean sheet in the mud, ensuring that she would have to enter Jerome's room later to replace him. At 5, Jelani began to feed the horses with a special mixture that would leave them agitated at night, ensuring distraction for the stable guards. The sound of the senzala drums began at sunset, a practice tolerated only when you were absent. The rhythm was not random. He carried codified messages, marking time, synchronizing actions dispersed by the mill. For detached ears, it was just primitive music. For the initiates, it was a precise watch. In the kitchen, Ayana prepared the food of the night with special care. In each dish intended for the guards, a minimum dose of soporiferous herbs, not enough to fall asleep completely, just to make them less alert, slower in their reactions. Dandara moved between these scenarios as a shadow, adjusting details, correcting small deviations on the plane. His back still hurt the blows received days earlier, but the pain had become fuel. Underneath her simple clothes, small knives were tied with cloth strips to her thighs. At 9 at night, when Jerome was already drunk in his room, Ayana was sent to bring him a special bottle of cachaça, a secret gift from one of the guards, actually prepared by Dandara with herbs that would increase the effect of alcohol and decrease their reflexes. At 10 o'clock, the combined signal echoed by the mill, 3 rapid beats followed by a long one in the senzala drums. At different parts of the property, 5 people looked at the sky without stars and took a deep breath, knowing that their lives would end that night, or as fugitives, or as martyrs. At 11 o'clock, Jerome was already in an alcoholic stupor, but still conscious when Ayana was called to her room to help him undress. Her only eyes shone with determination as she entered the beast's ham, carrying not only clean bedding, but the weight of all the humiliations suffered. The moment had arrived. The night of September 13, 1763 entered the unregistered history of Brazil as the night of precise cuts. It all started at 23:15 when the last bell of the day sounded and the night guards took their positions, already subtly affected by herbs in their food. Dandara moved as water between shadows, taking advantage of each blind point in the surveillance system she had mapped for years. Barefoot, his feet did not produce any sound on the dirt floor. From his hiding place behind the kitchen, he observed when Ayana entered the small house attached where Jerome slept. The plan depended on perfect timing, Ito. At 23:30, Jelani released 2 horses in the courtyard, creating the necessary distraction. The guards, as planned, ran to capture valuable animals. At the same time, Makina accidentally knocked down a lamp in the laundry, starting a small fire that attracted more attention. Within 5 minutes, Jerome's house was effectively isolated from the rest of the mill. At 23:40, Dandara slid into the house through the back windows. In the poorly lit room, he found exactly the scenario they had planned. Semi-conscious Jerome in bed, his heavy body for alcohol and special herbs, while Ayana pretended to organize the sheets. His eyes met, a silent dialogue between sisters who shared not only blood, but scars left by the same man. Ayana silently left the room, locking the door on the outside as agreed. Dandara approached the bed where Jerome lay in his stupor. He tried to focus his eyes on her, the understanding slowly appearing on his drunk face. "You," he murmured, trying to get up. "Yes, me," Dandara answered calmly, revealing the first knife tied to her thigh. "I came to charge a debt." What followed was not an impulsive act of anger, but a methodically planned execution. Dandara didn't just want to kill Jerome. I wanted each cut to represent a specific atrocity. The first, accurate and surgical blow hit his right hand, the same one that wielded the whip against Ayana. "This is my sister's face." Jerome tried to scream, but Dandara had prepared a mixture of herbs that, when forced in her mouth, paralyzed her vocal cords temporarily. He could feel everything, see everything, but could not emit more than muffled grunts. The second cut reached his right eye, a symbolic retribution by the eye Ayana had lost. "Now you see only half the world, like her." Dandara worked with the accuracy of a healer, knowing exactly where to cut to maximize pain without causing immediate death. For 27 minutes, she executed her revenge meticulously. Every part of the body that Jerome had used to torture others received special attention. The hands that wielded the whip, the mouth that gave cruel orders, the feet that kicked down slaves. With each cut, Dandara recited the name of a victim. By Bakari. By Zarina. By Kofi. At one point, he leaned close to Jerome's ear and whispered, "Are you feeling fear now? This is the fear you planted in hundreds of hearts. The difference is that for them there was no end. For you, there is." The final blow, applied precisely at midnight, separated the head of the body. Dandara positioned her, turning to the door so that it was the first thing anyone would see upon entering. On frozen lips, in a horror expression, he placed a small red flower, the symbol that would later be recognized in other mills, such as the mark of the Dandara method. When he finished, Dandara was not covered in blood as she could expect. His movements had been so accurate, so controlled that only a few drops staining his clothes. He collected his knives, cleaned them methodically, and put a strand of Jerome's hair in a small leather bag. The last act was not in the original plan. Dandara took Jerome's special whip, the one with metal ends that she had disfigured Ayana, and left him over the quartered chest, forming the symbol of an inverted cross. It was a message for those who found the body. The instruments of torture could be turned against their owners. When she left the room, her eyes met Ayana's, who waited outside. No word has been exchanged. It was not necessary. The silence that followed the execution carried more eloquence than any victory speech. The dawn of September 14th, 1763, brought more than a new day to the Santo Antonio mill, brought a complete transformation in the power structures. While the quartered body of Jerome cooled in his room, Dandara brought together 32 slaves in the farthest barn of the big house. The ritual that followed was mixed elements of various African traditions preserved in collective memory. In the center of the barn, Dandara lit a small fire using wood of the same tree where slaves were whipped. Around the flame he has provided symbol objects: the bloody whip of Geronimo, seeds of African plants kept by generations, land collected from graves of slave killed in the mill. "The fire purifies," she said, throwing dry herbs in the flames that produced an aromatic smoke. "Today we burn our fear. Today we burn our invisible currents." One by one, the participants approached the fire to burn some object that symbolized their oppression: a piece of rope, a tagging label, a whip fragment. As the we were consumed by the flames, Dandara drove a low-volume corner, teaching them to turn pain into strength. The second part of the ritual involved practical preparation. Non-perishable foods were distributed in small packages. Rudimentary maps of the region, designed in pieces of fabric with vegetable paints, showed the way to the nearest Quilombo, about 4 days of travel to the north. Improvised weapons were delivered to the strongest. Medicinal herbs were distributed among those with knowledge to use them. Some slaves expressed resistance to the escape plan. The fear of the unknown, the relentless hunt that would come, paralyzed them. An elderly woman cried, saying she prefers the known slavery to the uncertainty of freedom. Dandara didn't force her, understood that not everyone was ready for the same way. Each one chooses its resistance, she said. Some are about to protect those who cannot escape. Some leave to build what will come later. None are less important. Of the 237 slaves of the mill, 78 decided to leave that dawn. Organized in small groups of 10 to 15 people, would leave the mill at regular intervals over different routes, reducing the chances of mass capture. The children were divided between the groups, each carrying a small bundle with native seeds of Africa, preserving not only lives, but culture. Ayana led the first group. His disfigured face, once a mark of shame, had become a symbol of resistance. Dandara stayed behind with the last group, ensuring that everyone else departs safely. When the sun began to dye the horizon red, the 19th person's final column left the mill by the background. Dandara was the last to enter the dense vegetation. On the border between slavery and the possibility of freedom, he turned to look at the Santo Antonio mill one time. The rising sun illuminated the big house, the senzala, the sugarcane fields. For a fleeting moment, Dandara imagined everything on fire, consumed by the same purifying fire that had turned on hours earlier. Not by desire for destruction, but as a symbol of renaissance. Then, with one last look at the place that had been his captivity for almost 2 decades, disappeared into the woods, carrying not only the scars on his back, but the method that would inspire other resistances. The poetic image that was recorded in the memory of those who departed at dawn was Dandara stopped at the edge of the forest, his clipped silhouette against the reddish sky of dawn, as a deity that existed between 2 worlds, not completely belonging to any. The news of the murder of Geronimo Albuquerque and the mass escape of Ingenio Santo Antonio spread through the captaincy of Bahia with the speed of the wind. On September 16th, just 2 days after the incident, the Governor-General already received the first official reports detailing the barbaric quarter and the dangerous insurgency. The initial report, written by Dom Francisco himself, described the scene found upon returning from the festivities. The Jerome overseer was found in state that decency prevents me from describing in detail, quartered in a way that suggests anatomical knowledge, with a red flower placed in his mouth and his own sacri, like discipline instrument over his remains. The colonial authorities exchanged alarmed correspondence. A letter from Salvador's captain to the viceroy mentioned, "I fear that this is not an isolated case but part of broader conspiracy. The method demonstrates cold calculation that contradicts the impulsive nature attributed to slaves. The accuracy of the cuts and the symbology involved suggest a new and dangerous form of rebellion." In October, similar cases began to emerge in neighboring mills. An overseer known for exceptional cruelty was found in the same condition in Feira de Santana. Another in Santo Amaro had the same pattern: methodical disorder, red flower, instrument of torture over the body. In none of these cases there were witnesses or clues about the executors. The geographical expansion of the Dandara method, as it became known among slaves, although authorities never identified the name of the creator, followed a pattern that suggested communication between quilombos. Reports arrived from Pernambuco, after Rio de Janeiro, always with the same modus operandi, particularly cruel overseers, precise cuts, the red flower as a signature. In December 1763, the Governor-General issued a decree establishing the Red Flower Prevention Statute, the first time the authorities officially recognized the standard. The document established measures as double guard for overseers, prohibition of slaves with knowledge of medicinal herbs, and exemplary punishments for any slave found with flowers v. or melas. For the owners of mills and farms, the method represented materialized terror, the possibility that those who considered property could transform knowledge into a lethal weapon. Many gentlemen started sleeping with armed guards at the door and tasters for their meals, fearing poisoning. For the enslaved, however, each new case represented a spark of hope. Stories whispered in the senzalas spoke of Dandara as a kind of revenge spirit that could cross walls and become a shadow. Some said she had never been captured because she could turn into a bird and fly away from danger. The panic among the ruling class contrasted with silent hope among the oppressed. An anonymous account of a Jesuit priest noted, "The most disturbing is not the violence of acts, but the effect on the spirit of enslaved. Where before there was resignation, I now see a dangerous shine in the eyes, as if each one kept a secret. I fear that we are witnessing not only isolated murders, but the birth in a new and organized way of resistance." The official response of the colonial authorities to the threat of the Dandara method was fast and brutal. In January 1764, the Governor-General authorized the formation of a special force led by Captain Rodrigo Mendonça, a veteran of war against the Dutch, with expressions expressed to exterminate the Quilombo, responsible for the dissemination of this harmful practice and capturing the main public examples of the conspiracy. 100 professional soldiers, reinforced by 200 mercenaries and slave hunters, began an unprecedented military operation in the Bahian Recôncavo. The siege strategy was based on stranger gradually the areas of forest where Quilombs were suspected, cutting supply routes and poisoning water sources. Dandara and her group had found refuge in the Orobo Quilombo, a community hidden between mountains in the interior of Bahia that housed more than 300 fugitives. There, her reputation already preceded her. Stories of her meticulous revenge had traveled faster than her feet. The Quilombo leader, a man named Zumvi who led the community for 15 years, was initially skeptical about Dandara's method, preferring defensive tactics to direct attacks. Revenge attracts revenge, he argued during the debating council, if they should officially adopt the method. Each dead overseer means 100 soldiers sent against us. Each alive overseer means 100 tortured slaves daily, said Dandara. Fear must change sideways. For weeks, the debate divided the Quilombo into factions. Meanwhile, the military siege approached. In March 1764, Quilombo's first line of defense was discovered by colonial army scouts. The following attack resulted in the death of 17 Quilombolas and the capture of 3, who under torture revealed the approximate location of the main settlement. The betrayal came from within. One of Zumvi's advisors, fearing the complete destruction of the Quilombo, sent a secret message to Captain Mendonça, offering Dandara to deliver on mercy to the others. The plan was to attract her to a specific clearing on the pretext of planning a counterattack. The night before the day scheduled for betrayal, Ayana had a premonitory dream where she saw her sister surrounded by soldiers. Upon awakening, he begged Dandara not to meet. With the sharp intuition for years of survival, Dandara noticed the trap, but made a surprising decision. "I will go anyway." When questioned by Ayana, he explained, "Our fight is not for our individual lives, but for something bigger. If my capture buy time for hundreds to escape and spread the method, then it is a price I accept to pay." On April 12, 1764, Dandara went to the designated clearing, not alone as planned by the traitors, but accompanied by 23 loyal followers who had sworn to die beside him if necessary. Among them was Ayana, who stated, "If we shared the same blood, we will share the same destination." The following combat became legendary in oral stories transmitted by generations. Surrounded by much superior forces, Dandara and his companions fought with a ferocity that haunted to the most experienced soldiers. Official reports mention that she killed 7 men before being injured, using small knives as accurately she had used to perform Jerome. Ayana fell first, shot in the chest while protecting her sister. Dandara held her as she died, whispering old songs from her homeland. One by one, his followers were falling, every death buying precious time so that the main Quilombo evacuated. When they finally captured it, Dandara was alone in a circle of bodies, wounded but not defeated. His last words before being chained have become part of the resistance folklore. "You can arrest my body, but the method is already loose in the world." Captain Mendonça, impressed by his bravery, recorded in his diary, "I never saw such dignity in the face of certain death. She did not beg, did not tremble, did not lower her eyes. It looked more like a queen captured in just war than a fugitive slave." Dandara was taken to Salvador for public execution, planned as an exemplary show to discourage future rebellions. On the way, he survived 3 rescue attempts organized by allied Quilombos, further increasing his legend. The tragic grandeur of its final resistance has transformed it, still into life, of a person into a symbol. In the decades and centuries that followed Dandara's public execution in Salvador, his history has actually transformed himself a historical legend, and of legend in myth. The memory of his method of resistance spread among the enslaved populations far beyond Bahia, crossing captaincies and even reaching other Portuguese colonies. Popular reports spoke of a black saint that protected slaves against the cruelty of the overseers. In some versions, she had not died, but turned into a guardian spirit who visited senzalas at night, teaching methods of resistance through dreams. The planters prohibited such stories, which naturally only increased their dissemination. Mysterious objects began to circulate between enslaved communities. Small rudimentary manufacturing knives with inscriptions in African languages, amulets containing dryly blessed dried herbs, coded designs indicating vital points in the human body. Such objects were passed from hand to hand, such as sacred relics and practical tools simultaneously. Folkloric songs preserved elements of their history, although often coded to avoid punishment. A popular work song in the northeast sugarcane fields contained the verses, "The red flower sprouted, in the mouth of whom caused pain. The iron comes back to owner, when the night hides the sun." For unsuspecting ears, it seemed just a song about flowers. For the initiates, it was a condensed resistance manual in poetry. Places associated with their history have become secret pilgrimage points. The tree where they said that his body had been exposed after execution, on the outskirts of Salvador, regularly received offering of red flowers left at night. 6 slaves made promises to Dandara, and inexplicable healings were attributed to their intervention. Over the generations, the Jim and the official history have tried to completely decrease or erase their existence. Colonial documents referred to her only as the rebellious slave, or the Institute of the Flower Method, even denying her the name. Historians of the Empire and the Republic wondered whether it really existed, or it would be just a collective personification of various acts of resistance. Meanwhile, popular memory preserved not only its existence, but the details of its technique, its personality, its motivation. Mothers told his story in whispers for daughters, who passed her to the next generations. Traditional healers invoked their name when preparing medicines. Capoeira masters included movements that, it was said, mimicked their fighting technique. The dichotomy between official silence and vibrant memory and oral traditions created 2 parallel stories of Brazil, one recorded in books, another in hearts. The debate on Dandara's historical existence continues today, with traditional academics demanding documentary evidence as descendant communities of enslaved affirm the truth of their collective memory. A final symbol emerges from these contradictory narratives. In Candomblé, Terreiros, and Umbanda throughout Brazil, an entity called Red Flower, or Lady of Justice, is occasionally incorporated. When present, it always brings the same advice. True freedom begins when we lose the fear of dying for it. If you watch so far, it is because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so that I can meet you and know who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video if Dandara's story touched your heart. Share so that Dandara's memory is never forgotten.